Welcome to the Moonshots Podcast. I'm your co-host, Mike Parsons, joined by the one and only Chad Owen.
Hey, Mike.
Hey, good morning, New York.
Good evening, Australia.
Thank you. And it is with great delight that I've stayed up late to record this very exciting show. And I thought it would be helpful for everyone that we actually mention this is June 30 because, as you'll know, our listeners last week found that the timing of our show seems to be very important. So welcome one and all here on June 30 for our third episode. And we're going to go and learn from some of, if not one of the greatest ever innovators, not only of our time, but I think of history. And we're going to grab lots of inspiration along the way. So, Chad, who do we have for this episode?
Jeff Bezos, who's known most for founding Amazon.com. But as we will find out later in the show, he's spun off many other businesses and acquired many businesses along the way.
He's like, he is so busy. He is not only just doing Amazon, his laundry list is off the charts. But before we get into Jeff, now that the show's been going for several episodes, I think we need to touch into the famous Moonshots news tracker. And both Elon and Travis, who have featured on our show of the last few weeks, have been busy. I don't know if you saw this, Chad, but did you actually realize that Elon and his boring company has actually started the boring of tunnels in Los Angeles? I didn't, until a few days ago, I didn't realize that they had actually even started. I thought they were just in discussions.
Yeah, no, I thought they were still just doing the testing out in the desert. I had no idea that they were already underneath the city.
So, The news is that they've actually completed the first section of their first tunnel in Los Angeles. And I was completely floored by this. The speed at which Elon moves is pretty tremendous. So it felt like only a few weeks ago they were having positive discussions with the different bodies that govern transport in Los Angeles, and already now they've completed the first section, which is pretty breathtaking, isn't it?
Yeah, pretty hard to believe how fast he moves.
So very exciting to see where that brings the whole idea of tunneling under cities. And if you're interested in that and much more about Elon, you can go and listen to our very first episode. But really, that news is kind of trivial compared to what happened in the last week with Travis Kalanick, the now former CEO of Uber. What did you think when we just recorded the show and literally later that day the news came out? What was your first reaction, Chad?
I think we saw it coming. I don't think we saw it coming quite as soon as it had happened. That was actually quite a shock to stop podcasting and then open up the New York Times website and see that the investors had essentially given Travis an ultimatum to step down as CEO or he'd be forced out.
Yeah, it was pretty dramatic stuff and very. You really feel for the guy. In the space of a few months, his once shiny company is thrust into the limelight for all the wrong reasons, let's be honest. And there's the passing of his mother, the injury of his father, and then forced resignation. Nobody wishes that upon anyone, and very trying times for him, I think, right now.
Yeah, I hope that the Council of 13 is able to interview and vet, a leader to take the helm. I don't think you can have a company like Uber, continue to grow like it has without someone very, very strong at the helm. So it'll be very interesting to see where Uber goes in the coming months.
Yeah.
In terms of their executive search.
Yeah, and the funny thing is that you'll remember our conversation, and I was saying, Travis really needed a Sheryl Sandberg, and she's actually been named in several speculative pieces as the potential CEO for Uber, which would be, in my mind, that would be a killer move. I think there's a young man called Mark living down there in Palo Alto who's probably not so keen on the idea. Who would you go for if you could put in a new CEO, Chad? Who's your pick for a new Uber CEO?
Well, I don't know that I have one. I'd have to give some long, hard thought to who'd be best suited for that role, because I think you'd have to be well suited to respond to the kind of endemic cultural and hiring issues that Uber has had in its scale, but also be really familiar with operations and know how to launch, essentially a new multi-million-dollar business in a city, in a matter of weeks, as they're continuing to do as they expand.
Yeah, so let's think about who's floating around. Well, there's a very talented lady who's recently become the former CEO of Yahoo. Could you see Marissa Mayer perhaps as somebody who you could put in place there? Is that the kind of person, or is that still a little bit too tech? Would you go for someone who's a little bit more large-scale operations?
I mean, I would look into like logistics industries, something like FedEx or UPS, even someone at Amazon. I think just the way they've designed their logistics and fulfillment centers, I think that kind of thinking could do well applied to Uber.
I agree. I totally agree. And in our show notes on moonshots.io, we will have links not only to the announcement about the Boring Company and Los Angeles. We'll also have a great article that we really encourage you guys out there, the listeners, to check out, which is the New York Times follow-up piece to the announcement around Uber and Travis. And they sort of sketch out that last day and how it went down. It's great reading. So check out the link at moonshots.io.
And stay tuned for another big piece of news related to Jeff's newest acquisition, but have to wait a little bit longer for that as we get into the show.
Yeah, so we have a fabulous interview that he did with Recode, which is by far one of the leading sort of tech annual get-togethers where the biggest and the best all get on stage with Kara and Walt, and fantastic interview from 2016. So many goodies in this, lots for our listeners to learn, to use and to apply in their daily work. But I just want to take a moment, Chad, just to sketch what Jeff has achieved. Now, everybody knows Jeff Bezos. And yes, he's been on the cover of Time magazine as Person of the Year. He's been named on every single list that there could potentially be. He is even a member of the Bilderberg Group. Now, Chad, have you ever heard of this little auspicious group called the Bilderberg Group?
I've not, but it sounds, what's it, like the Bohemian Grove, that sort of thing?
I don't know how bohemian it is, but it's generally considered to be the people who run the world. So it's a very high-end group of people, and Mr. Thiel, another famous tech innovator, is a member of Bilderberg as well, and they get together in these annual summits and generally talk about the future of the world and what they can do to make it happen. And one of those things that's hard to get an invite to, that's for sure. But, Bezos, for me, Chad, is remarkable in so many ways. He's really built the company at Amazon from scratch, but everybody associates him with that. But do you realize the amount of things he's done? Obviously, we have his efforts in space and his acquisitions of Zappos. But when I looked up the list of companies that he is an investor in, he referred, the umbrella organization is the Bezos Expeditions. I was amazed at how many amazing companies he's also an investor in. Were you surprised when you saw this list of his Bezos Expeditions and all these participations?
I think the most surprising thing to me was to find out that he was a very, very early investor in Google, and that his investment of, probably just a couple $100,000 alone, is probably worth a couple $billion at this point. So completely outside of building Amazon to like a $450 billion market cap company, this small investment he made in Google so many years ago also turned him into a billionaire too.
That's crazy. So how early was he involved in Google?
I don't want to misspeak, but I mean, he was in, I think, the very first like official round, and he was kind of late to the party. But he's such a hard negotiator that he was able to get the same terms as the first moving investors.
That's incredible. So let me hit you with a couple of the real standouts for me. So I'm just going to go alphabetically through the list. So this is for everyone listening. Just remember, this is outside of doing the world's biggest online retailer. Here's where he's also invested in. One, a little travel and accommodation application called Airbnb. Obviously, he has Blue Origin for his space business. Domo, which is really touted in the biz as being the long-term winner of business intelligence software. Huge valuation as well at Domo. General Assembly, for anyone who's trying to learn technology, you'll probably bump into General Assembly. You mentioned Google. And then when I go through, there's some really interesting sites I love. Have you heard of Nextdoor?
Yeah, I have.
Great tool, used it a heap when I lived in San Francisco, really taking off as some sort of local community hub. And crazily enough, there's like Workday and a bunch of other cool companies. But one that I didn't realize is, and very close to our show, he's actually an investor in Uber, which I didn't actually know.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, he has his... I think he's just so interested in the industry and in technology, and is just such an educated business person that he just wants to be a part of all of these companies.
That's true. And I think the other thing to note about this, and this is very particular to Silicon Valley, is who comes in and invests, particularly in your early rounds, is such a vote of confidence and creates a lot of momentum. I would even go as far as saying it kind of creates this fear of missing out with a lot of the crazy valuations. I think what our listeners can take away is that once you get beyond family and friends, and if you need to raise capital, if you can go and get someone who's really recognized as an industry leader, it does way more than just get money into the organization. It does more than raise capital. It really brings a vote of confidence. And you can just imagine that Larry and Sergey would have obviously appreciated how important, to say Jeff Bezos was an investor in Google in those early times, was such a big vote of confidence for them. I think anyone listening, if you're starting a company or raising capital, really think about very, very special people that you can get to come and participate in your organization from a capital perspective, and not only looking at the terms of the deal, but also getting those names on the board, on the shareholder list as a vote of confidence.
Yeah, and Sergey and Larry from Google actually approached Jeff really just for advice and some mentorship at first, because they were still at Stanford building their search algorithms at the same time that Amazon was, building out their internal search engines on Amazon.com. So that relationship started very early. And then, of course, when they came back to him and presented an opportunity for him to invest, he jumped at the chance because he was already familiar with them and had kind of been following their story for quite some time.
Yeah, very smart, very smart. Okay, so let's talk about this interview that we've pulled some clips from. It's the Recode conference from 2016, and it's really interesting because Jeff doesn't go on to these kind of conferences a lot. So we're very lucky to have this interview to work with. And he's sitting with Walt Mossberg, who's he's actually just retired, but he's a very famous reviewer. Have you ever read any Walt Mossberg reviews or interviews, Chad, when you've been thinking about that next Mac?
I can't remember the first time I came across him, but yeah, he's kind of one of the, I'd say 3 or 4, technology writers that I'm sure to read whenever some, new fangled piece of technology comes out.
Yeah, and he's definitely sort of the grandfather of the thorough consumer electronic review. And he sits down with Jeff in a very far-reaching. They go everywhere. It's a really broad and deep interview at the same time, and it was just wonderful to go through it. Frankly, I picked so many clips. I was so excited. I just got clip crazy. But
I had to rein you in there.
You did.
Mike showed up with 16 audio clips for us to listen to, which would have made the show about 3.5 hours. So we pared the clips down to much fewer than that.
Yes, and thank you for that. My excitement really shone through, and I want to say that to all of our listeners, as we go through these clips and decode them and break them down, I want them to really appreciate the breadth of what we've covered, and to also know that we thoroughly recommend going and watching the full interview. But it's really our job for the next 45 minutes is to really break down the thoughts, the behaviors, and the skills that Jeff has, and really try and build a bridge to some of the practices that you can have today to actually put this sort of innovation in practice. So, Chad, do you think it's time we go to the first clip?
Yeah, I'd love to hear what Jeff has to say.
Okay, so the first one is it's a very big inspirational thought, and it's Jeff really getting into the role of, you've probably heard of Amazon Alexa and Echo, which more broadly said is, a form of artificial intelligence. And here comes Jeff talking about what these technologies promise to bring and how important it is for Amazon.
The combination of new and better algorithms, vastly superior compute power, and the ability to harness huge amounts of training data, those 3 things are coming together to solve some previously unsolvable problems. And they're going to drive a tremendous amount of utility for customers, and customers are going to adopt those things.
So is this, at Amazon in particular, are you deeply committed to this becoming a huge part of your business and what you do?
Absolutely. We've been working on it. We worked on it kind of behind the scenes for 4 years. We have more than 1,000 people dedicated just to Alexa and the Echo ecosystem. We have now a big set of third-party apps, the Alexa skills that people have built using our SDK. And and there's so much more to come. It's just the tip of the iceberg of what you can do with these kinds of technologies.
The tip of the iceberg, is it the first inning, or is it?
It's the first inning.
Okay.
It might even be the first guys up at bat. It's really early, and I think we're on the edge of a golden era. It's going to be so exciting.
Okay, so he ends with this thought of artificial intelligence and the ability for machines to learn and do deep thinking on behalf of of customers, and artificial intelligence is so much better than human thought when it comes to at least seeing patterns in data and digging out that sort of stuff. He's really promising a golden era, and it just makes me wonder, Chad, like when you think of a golden era of artificial intelligence and all these intelligence devices in your home and in your computers and the way you work, what's got you excited about that sort of technology?
I'm most curious to see how quickly these types of technologies can learn. I think I think Jeff kind of hints at this deep learning capability that Amazon has, with better algorithms, more computing power, and a large data set. And it'll be really curious to me to see how Amazon can because those are really three core parts of their business with Amazon Web Services and all the data that they collect on people's, shopping habits. I think, the very specific use cases for this type of artificial intelligence will be really interesting to see, because I think we're many years away from the singularity where there will be an all intelligent machine intelligence. But as far as something that can help me do something very specific really well, I mean, just as one example that we use here on the show, there's a natural language transcribing service that takes, I think, like less than a minute to transcribe a 20 or 30 minute interview, and gives you with like 95% accuracy what is in that transcript. So right. Things like that, I think, are going to become more and more prevalent.
That's a great example. And because if you think about how long it would actually take a human to transcribe, there's no way they could do it that quickly. So that's a great use case. I think the thing that struck me about that clip, they have, what was it, 1,000 developers working on this?
Yeah, 1,000 only on the Alexa Echo ecosystem.
So think about, like, what startup in the world has 1,000 developers? Zero, right? No one has that many. But then think about the scale that Amazon already has just on web services and retail data. It's incredible. And it would really signify to me, if I was an entrepreneur right now, I would ask the question, well, if the next platform for Amazon is all about artificial intelligence, how could I build products, services, tools that make use of? He talked about the API that where they actually allow third parties to actually make use of their technology. I think that's low-hanging fruit right now that you can go and attack. But I think the bigger question is, it's actually a bit of a juxtaposition to Mark Zuckerberg, for example. He's saying that virtual reality is really the next big platform. And so actually, you have Jeff saying it's all AI. You've got Mark Zuckerberg saying it's virtual reality. There's a lot of big bets going on out there. Chad, when you think about VR versus AI, do you feel like, Bezos is the man that's got the winner here, or do you think Zuckerberg at Facebook's got something?
We haven't done a show on Zuckerberg yet, but right now I have to say, hands down, it's artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, and the horse, that Jeff is betting on. I think the opportunity for these very intelligent, nimble, and fast apps built on this artificial intelligence platform that they're building is going to have much more rapid adoption, not only by developers building the apps, but also by consumers. I think virtual reality is still a little ways away, and augmented reality.
Yeah, and I can tell you that, AI and VR both have incredible promise, but building virtual reality environments requires a lot more horsepower and resources than that of artificial intelligence, and that would really get my vote for the short to near term. And I think also what we need to remember is there's a little company called IBM who've built Watson, which is a competing technology, but also AI. So it looks like the AI ecosystem is going to get pretty rich, full of a number of players with a lot of resources. So, I just think it's very exciting just to think about what can come over the coming period with this. And there is some great tools that you can play with. You can actually use a web-based demo of Alexa, which, we'll put this in the show notes for you, so everyone who's listening can play with that. So it's something definitely worth checking out. Now, in all of my excitement, Chad, we have to get into this next clip, which is really about the big three of Amazon. So here we're going to have Jeff talking about what he calls the big three. And as we're listening to this, I want everybody really to think about how he can strip down this entire universe of everything that Amazon does. He can just break it down into three simple things. And here's what it means for Amazon when he talks about the big three.
The three big needle movers, in my opinion, we've thought this for 20 years, are selection, price, and speed of delivery. Delivery, convenience, delivery speed, and an associated set of attributes. And I think there's still a lot of progress to be made on those things. And then and also discovery. And I think if you get category by category, there's tons of invention remaining. I'm very excited about apparel and fashion, because I think that's a product category where you can do so much invention online. So over a 20-year time frame, I predict that selection, price, and delivery accuracy and speed will still be major drivers.
Okay, so this is quite a contrast to the first clip where he's, waxing lyrical about the golden era and the future to come. What was really fascinating for me is that he's like, we've only just started with selection, price, and speed, and there's plenty more work to do. And he's so right, and all the clues are there. Like this just confirms to me his thinking around drones and
what was missing for me, that's kind of the albatross, and I hinted at this earlier, like his acquisition of Whole Foods, right?
Right.
Like,
huge. And what in your mind, what's the logic of this, $13 billion acquisition? Where do you see this fitting into his needle movers and the ecosystem?
Well, interestingly enough, I really see it as broadening the selection, for the Amazon consumer, and also kind of this convenience thing that he's talking to. The interesting kind of juxtaposition is price, right? Because people kind of know Whole Foods as whole paycheck, and I think the biggest struggle between Amazon and Whole Foods, I think, is going to be around just that, is around price. So we'll have to see how that shakes out. But having that retail network for Amazon to then test out, what is the best way to pick the best produce from producers and get it to a retail store and then into a consumer's refrigerator. I think Whole Foods is the perfect customer for Amazon internal customer for Amazon to test out all of that.
Right. Now, here's the interesting thing. I agree there's a lot there in selection, okay? But I also would say this is a distribution play. He's just got hundreds and hundreds of distribution centers in the US like that. He's just picked them up. The other interesting thing is that perishables have been, perishables being food that, obviously perishes over time, requires refrigeration and sealing and so forth, is a really tricky business which they have not really mastered, have they? I mean, Amazon grocery is not that big, is it?
No, and it's been around almost 10 years.
Really? Is it 10 years?
Yeah, Amazon Fresh, I think, started deliveries I want to say in 2008 in the Seattle area.
So the interesting thing here is this helps them on speed and selection for sure, because they can be much closer to their customer using their retail network. And again, this is like, once you, at first listen, you might think, Whole Foods, whole paycheck, very expensive, Amazon, very affordable, but actually you can see how it fits in. And the one thing to also mention here is that the stock price on the Whole Foods was on a 2-3 year decline. It really had taken a big hit. There was actually a scandal, if I remember right, Chad, wasn't there a scandal in New York with pricing which really kind of started the turn against Whole Foods a couple of years ago?
I don't remember if there was one.
Yeah. So there was this thing where there was price discrepancies on the weighing of fresh produce And it started a whole thing. And what it really came in, it sort of aligned with, was that many of the competitors, such as Safeway and Kruger's, bulked up on organic whole foods and really started competing aggressively with Whole Foods. So the net of all of this is that the stock price was very depressed. So Amazon moved in with its buckets of cash, picked it up for a song, and has built out its network and its ability to deliver better selection and speed. And
just like you said, like for $13.7 billion, they now have 450 distribution centers,
exactly,
essentially ready to turn online today.
Exactly. Now, what's interesting around these needle moves and this big three is you can now see that this is why they actually built their own physical store in Seattle, which is all about a different way to discover their selection. And what was really interesting, we didn't actually, the clip didn't actually make our final list here, but Jeff actually went on to say that the reason that he's so excited about what they're doing in physical retail is they're using all of the data from Amazon.com to inform the selection of the 5,000 titles that goes into the physical store. So once again, it's just laddering up into just another way to select the right book.
Yeah, and did you see the really cool launch video for Amazon Go, their convenience store?
No. What happened?
Oh, well, it's a really slick video, but Amazon now has a convenience store, kind of like a mini grocery store, where you can just walk in and walk out.
That's what they
in
call
your
it.
Basket.
Yeah.
Amazon Go.
It's all RFID, so there is no checkout. You just walk out and it already tallies up what you've got and bills you. So the checkout is dead, right?
Yeah, and I think just the work that they're doing there and this acquisition of Whole Foods and experimenting with a retail bookstore, we're going to see a lot more manifestation of Amazon in the real world than we have before. Usually we're just used to Amazon being like, the brown UPS truck showing up with lots of boxes, but it won't be long before we can all be walking in and out of Amazon retail locations.
Yeah. There's a lot happening there, and I thought what was really interesting about the next clip we're going to play for everyone was there's actually a real art to picking winners here, and Amazon have had their failures. You might remember the Amazon Fire phone, which was a total dud, so they don't get it right all the time. But what was really striking was when Jeff started to get into some of their vision. So do you want to set up this next clip? Because I'm really excited to learn how they do this.
Like going back to the big three, it's interesting how Jeff kind of single-mindedly has chosen selection, price, and speed and convenience as his core, drivers of what's going to, take Amazon, to be successful. And he's been very stubborn about it over the years. And so here he is kind of talking about how he thinks about choosing what Amazon should be working on.
The most important things have always seemed dumb to industry experts at the beginning. So you have to get really good results. You have to defy conventional wisdom. And the problem, of course, is that conventional wisdom is usually correct. And so a simple test, like let's go talk to experts and ask them if we should do Amazon Web Services, that would be a huge failure. They would all tell you, this is stupid, stick to the knitting, you've got a great retail business, whatever you do, don't do this AWS thing, it's, you can't possibly work. And of course, that would have been wrong. And so you can't listen to people at the beginning when they say it won't work, but you do have to sort of say, what are we doing differently? Now let's say you're being stubborn on the vision and flexible on the details, which I think is the right recipe. You want always to be very flexible on the tactics and the details, but very stubborn on the vision and the strategy. And at some point, though, you may need to give up even on the vision. So you planted the seed. Great teams worked on it for multiple years. How do you know when is that day where you say, you know what, let's try the next one. And I think it's when the last high judgment champion folds his or her cards.
So there he is explaining why it's so important to not only choose a direction, but to stick to it very stubbornly. As long as he has kind of some champions around him. This also kind of leaves out a little bit about, I think what's also very core to Jeff and how he sees what Amazon does is they really are solving their own problems first.
Yes.
And really truly believing in that, like, well, let's become our best customer and learn from ourselves and just continue to do that and scale it in such a way that we can take it out to the market. Because he mentions Amazon Web Services. Well, their website infrastructure was growing so fast that, their developers didn't have, they couldn't build servers fast enough. And so their team looked internally and said, how can we solve this for ourselves and how can we turn it into a platform? And so, they worked away kind of just within Amazon solving that problem for themselves. And people said, you're crazy building these data centers and why? And then, well, of course, now it makes sense and it's a multi-billion-dollar business. But he had kind of that singular focus and stubbornness to do it because he knew that he was solving the problem for himself first.
And I think that's where he has that conviction, and you might argue that's where the vision comes from. They see what an operating problem it was for them, and then you're like, well, if we solve it for ourselves, hey, look at that. Maybe others have the same problem, and he's right. If you go back in time, even if I take you back, say 5-6 years and say, hey, guess what, Chad? Amazon's going to be the biggest web hosting company in the universe, you'd say it's a bookstore. What are you talking about? And I think it's the courage to hold on to the vision. And what was really interesting for our listeners is you can have like an almighty rock solid vision, but how you get there, like what he refers to as those tactics, you can be as flexible as you want. And I think that's really interesting as a behavioral approach. Hold on to the vision, if you see a big problem, but just be completely open to many different paths of getting the job done. And when you think about the conventional wisdom piece, if I said to you that Amazon was going to win a Golden Globe 5 years ago, you'd say crazy. Winning Emmys, I think they're one of the largest Emmy-winning studios last year. You'd say crazy. But the reality is that they have this great vision, and they'll use all sorts of tactics to get there. And the craziest thing I learned from this talk was he was explaining the flywheel effect of how providing movies and TV shows on Amazon.com helps them sell shoes. The people who watch the most
and
content,
vice versa.
Yes, because
the shoes help them make the content cheaper to provide to the customers. This is kind of this magic flywheel that is very core to Jeff's understanding of the business and how it needs to run. And this is something that he learned from other retailers very early on in his experience. Something I think that he actually picked up from Walmart is this idea that more customers allow you to make things, cheaper, which then brings in more customers, and that it becomes this virtuous cycle or flywheel, as he calls it, where you just keep, improving on those metrics, and it keeps spinning faster and faster and faster.
Yes, exactly. And so what I think is something that I take from this is where can you create this leverage in your business idea or your new product or service? And I think a great example, I'm just thinking about how he mentions in the talk, he mentions how excited he is about fashion. And anybody working in the fashion world, heads up, when you hear him say that, you either have to get on the Amazon boat or run for your life, because when they bring all their scale and selection and price and speed to an industry, watch out. But the interesting thing is, I think about services that have similar characteristics, and they use data to understand and to extrapolate and to see patterns. The more clients that get on platforms like that, like I think about Stitch Fix in the fashion world, and they basically use data like Amazon does to improve the recommendations of outfits to its customers. These platforms have this exponential characteristic where the more customers come on, the better the recommendations get. So the more they buy, so the more the customers they get. And it's, again, a flywheel effect. And this creates enormous momentum, which is when you look at the breadth of their innovation, from one-click shopping to the world's biggest online store to, goodness knows me, AWS and beyond. When you look at that, they have flywheel effects on several businesses operating independently to almost create a meta flywheel. And that's why I would recommend, if you want to invest the college fund anywhere, it has to be in businesses that have this characteristic, because it's quite powerful, isn't it?
Well, in looking at our own businesses too, he identified his big three: selection, price, and convenience and speed, and then just invests in those, because he knows that every time he improves one of those, it improves all the rest.
And the crazy thing is, we've only done 3 of the clips. We've got so many more goodies from Jeff Bezos to come. We're going to talk a little bit about getting into space, and he's got some very interesting parallels with Elon, and then he diverges a little bit as well. So we're going to get into that. Also coming up, he's got some great thoughts that we can all get something from around culture and the meaning of our work. But before we get into all those clips to come, we've got to do your favorite segment, Chad. You're an average reader. You've been reading up on Jeff. What's your book recommendation for this episode?
So the oddness of it was not lost on me. The fact that I'm reading a book about Amazon on a Kindle and listening to it through Audible, an Amazon company. It's so fitting, right? But I really loved the book The Everything Store by the author Brad Stone, who covers a lot of technology companies and figures. This book was written over a number of years, and to me gives a really great foundational understanding of not only Jeff as an individual, but also his thinking that led to the founding of Amazon, and how that thinking kind of guided each new era for Amazon. I mean, over the past 20 years, they have 22 years now. They've just done so many things. I think people forget how old in relative terms a company like Amazon is. But I would just say some of the things that stood out the most to me were, do a funny little experiment for me, Mike. In your browser, open up a new tab.
Sure.
And type in the domain relentless.com.
Okay, here we go. Relentless. So I'm rediverted to Amazon.com.
Yeah. So one of the early ideas for the name of the company was Relentless, and I think that is really telling of how devoted and single-minded Jeff was. I mean, he literally just wanted to take over the world from day one. So he registered relentless.com as one of the domain names, as in case he chose that as the name of the business.
So let me ask you, how when you kind of decode this idea of him being so relentless, what do you take from that? Like, what's the advice you give to yourself? How do you use that for you in your work and making films?
I think for Jeff, it's a relentless pursuit of truth. It seemed like everyone that worked directly or closely with Jeff was really taken aback by just how important core truths are to him. So that could be the core truth of like, why does this business unit exist? Like, what is our purpose? Why are you as an individual here at this company? What's your truth? And so for me, as a storyteller, the pursuit of that core truth is kind of like, that's the gold, that's the treasure, right?
Yeah. I related to the relentlessness. Like, he was out there driving the delivery truck. Like, he wasn't sitting, on a throne behind 3 monitors writing code. He was quite prepared to get out there and ship the product to his customers. And that all had the hallmarks of this relentless drive. Any other last surprises or interesting tidbits that came to you from the Everything Store?
Oh, there's so many. I mean, I really encourage everyone to read it. I think if you listen to it, it's about a 6-hour, a 12-hour listen. There's so many anecdotes that I wish I could get to all of them. But another story that I found really interesting is, people within Amazon, one of the things that they're afraid of the most is a forwarded email from Jeff with just a question mark at the top. And what will happen is, because he's so focused on the customer, everything is about, I think Amazon's mission statement now is Amazon will be the most customer-centric company in the world.
Yes, it is, yeah.
And, so instead of, being a store or anything, like they're just, a customer-centric company. That's their mission statement now. But what happens is, somewhere in the customer service ecosystem, something goes wrong, and Jeff will find out about it. You can email him at jeff@amazon.com. And so these customer requests will then get forwarded to, some business unit leader with a question mark. And essentially that overrides every single priority, that they have in the system. And they need to fix that problem like in the next few hours, because Jeff is going to be getting on the phone or coming and seeing you about that particular problem. And it was just really fascinating to me, how obsessed he could be about the customer, which again is kind of his core focus.
And I would say that it draws a very interesting parallel for both Uber and Tesla, who we've covered in the show before, because this shared characteristic, these 3 incredibly successful companies, is that they have insane focus on solving customer problems, creating solutions that are 10 times better than anything else in the market at that time. And that is the interconnecting thought that you can wrap all 3 companies into the same basket with. It's making things dramatically better for customers. They're all in some way, shape, or form obsessed about user experience, customer experience, and I think that's what really sets them apart. So that's a great book recommendation. It's actually been on my list. I think you've put me across the threshold. So I'm getting on a plane in 2 days. So I'll put that one on there. Actually, I have the Steve Jobs one, the bio, which is sitting on there. So that one will get it going over as well. So great book recommendation. Before we go to the last 2 clips, just a quick recap on what we've covered so far. I think without a doubt, Jeff is very strongly putting us into the upcoming golden era of artificial intelligence. So I'm pretty big for that one. Chad, I think that got your vote. No VR for you. It's AI all the way, right?
Oh yeah, deep learning.
Deep learning. And what was really interesting to kind of push off that was those real fundamentals of the big three: selection, price, and speed, and how the entire business strategy of Amazon is kind of coming back to those three core and essential pillars that he's building the business around. I thought your clip, Chad, around defying conventional wisdom really gave us a bit of an insight into how they pick these winners that a lot of people on the outside don't pick. It really is, he really does have this ability to defy conventional wisdom, doesn't he?
Yeah, and this next clip I'd like to introduce, I think very well encapsulates Jeff's, where I think some of his biggest innovation is, and that's around conceiving of new business models and new structures for business models around providing simple services as a platform that other people can leverage. And he kind of pays homage to everything that was in place for him to be in the right place at the right time to start Amazon. So here he is.
If you go back to when I started Amazon, all of the heavy lifting infrastructure to support Amazon was already in place. We did not have to invent a remote payment system. It was already there. It was called the credit card. We did not have to invent transportation, local transportation, last mile. There was this thing called the US Postal Service and UPS. If we had to deploy last mile transportation 20 years ago, it would have cost hundreds of billions of dollars of capital. It would have been impossible for a company like Amazon to even conceive of doing that. Same thing, deploying compute infrastructure. There was already a computer on every desk, and it wasn't put on every desk so that people could do e-commerce. There was a computer on every desk mostly in the home so people could play games. And there was also, how did the internet grow so fast? Even there, the heavy lifting infrastructure had already been done for another purpose, which was the long-distance phone network. So when it comes to space, I see it as my job. This is what I'm building infrastructure the hard way. I'm using my resources to put in place heavy lifting infrastructure so that the next generation of people can have a dynamic, entrepreneurial explosion into space.
Explosions into space. I love that visual metaphor, and I think it's really telling. Everything that Amazon is doing aside, Blue Origin, the space delivery company that Jeff has started, is doing it so that he can enable more entrepreneurs to innovate in space. And it's a natural outgrowth of two things. One, his success at Amazon for building platforms like Fulfillment by Amazon, Amazon Web Services, the Alexa API and platform, and extending it into kind of his boyhood passion for space. And he says, if we're going to get into space, we need to make it cheaper. Very, very much of how Elon thinks about it. Not so that, Blue Origin can be the company that goes into space, but that Blue Origin can be the platform upon which thousands of companies can then be sent into space.
Yeah, this really fascinated me because I must admit, as passionate and as curious and interested as I am in Amazon, I haven't spent a lot of time studying all his space initiatives. And I had just assumed it was a bit sort of the same flavor as Elon. But when you hear him saying, I'm building, I think of, you hear the word software as a service, he's building space as a service, right? He's building a whole new galaxy of possibilities and putting in all of the essential plumbing for entrepreneurs and innovators to build this whole new universe of opportunity and possibilities. And it's a quite radically different view than, say, that of Elon, and fascinating nonetheless. It's actually the fact that he could decode everything that Amazon already had and says, I just need to put the space equivalents in place and then we'll have a prosperous space economy.
Yeah, and I have to give him a lot of props for taking his wins from Amazon and doing that. Like it's no small feat to be launching reusable rockets into space, consistently and safely, to make that happen.
So I guess building blocks in space kind of looks and feels like everything from space stations to fueling stations to all the things you need, because distance is the real challenge. And existing power paradigms we can't even get to Mars. So I feel like he must be thinking about, launch platforms where you can launch your own rocket building services, then refueling and delivery services actually in space. Like, it's fascinating how he's just looking to create all those underlying conditions for a whole entire new galaxy, isn't he?
Yeah, I think the kind of Uber strategy that a lot of people have kind of alluded to, and a lot of the writings that I've been reading, especially after the Whole Foods acquisition, is that Jeff Bezos and Amazon want to take a slice of essentially all consumer spending, groceries, electronics, computing power, machine learning, and now he's just extending that into space. So anyone that's doing any kind of activity into space, he wants Amazon to be a part of that.
Yeah, and I would say where I see this being very powerful, if we're thinking about, okay, yeah, all right, so it's Jeff, he's thinking about space, good for him. I don't have a few billion to launch rockets into space. What you can do if you're listening to this podcast and you're thinking about new inventions, new innovations, or you want to scratch the entrepreneurial itch, I think what he's doing is he's studying the patterns of success, what it took for Amazon to be successful, and he's then applying that and looking for those same drivers, the same factors in other spaces. So I think this is an opportunity for us all to think about an area in which we want to do something very innovative and look for some of the signal, some of the evidence of things that are there that promise success, but also look for some of the missing pieces. And we can ask ourselves, what can we fill in there? So there's a real opportunity here, I think, to understand that he studies success, he looks at the formula, and then he applies it into a new space, which is really interesting.
And I'd love for you to introduce the next clip, Mike, because I think it's a great kind of ending to our discussion about Jeff Bezos and Amazon.
Okay, so I think it's fair to say that Amazon has a bit of a mixed report card on culture, depending on who you talk to. They've definitely had some criticism. They do some really interesting things as well. And this next clip is Jeff talking to Walt about culture and more so getting into what drives us every day to turn up and to, be at our best when we're at work.
I'm very proud of the culture that we have at Amazon. And, I think of it as a gold standard culture for innovation and pioneering work. And the people, I work with these people who, they're missionaries for what they do. They are, if you're giving great customer experience, the only way to do that is with happy people. You can't do it with a set of miserable people, watching the clock all day. And I think for most people, it's about meaning. People want to know that they're doing something interesting and useful. And for us, because of the challenges that we have chosen for ourselves, we get to work in the future. And it's super fun to work in the future for the right kind of person.
I like how he slipped in that little caveat in it. It's amazing. The future's great. Oh, but just for the right person. And I think that he was going for that appetite for risk and constant change, don't you think?
Yeah, just in my research, on the company, and Jeff, like, he really talks about recruiting explorers, and he uses the word pioneers and missionaries. I mean, he is, and Amazon is looking for a very specific kind of person to work there.
Yeah, and the one thing I related to, I thought which was very important for all of us to remember, is like, you are not going to create an amazing product if the work culture is not one where people thrive and are happy. And, happy people give great customer support, great customer service. That's as simple as he gets it down to. And it's so true. Culture is so abstract, so hard to manage. But it's essential, because it doesn't matter how much tech you have. We saw it with Uber, didn't we? Great tech, great business model, but found lacking on culture. I mean, that was so evident from the last show, wasn't it?
Yeah, and the Amazon culture has stood the test of time, right? I mean, they've been around for over 20 years now, with many employees and executives having been there from the very first days.
Yeah, and when you sit back and appreciate the scale and the spectrum of what they're doing, I mean, did you know they own 40 jumbo jets to improve last mile delivery? They're the biggest hosting company on the planet. They're the biggest online retailer in the planet. He's going on to send people into space and to create the infrastructure of space. He's an investor in some of the best startups. Well, they're not even really startups anymore, but it's phenomenal.
Yeah, I really think that we should continue to look at Amazon and learn, some more about. I do think that there are some internal issues at Amazon that should be more fully explored, because if they don't, then they could run the risk of turning into these kind of scandals that Uber and other companies have been having to deal with. So I'm very curious if something doesn't come back up around that and around the culture at Amazon.
Yeah, especially with when you've got such a high number of factory workers and people, a large workforce of people that are close or on minimum wage. There's a huge responsibility that goes with that. And we've really seen Uber trip up on relationships with drivers and the perception they're extracting way too much and punishing their drivers with very low fees. So it's a very big watch out there. But he was just, Jeff, when you listen to his ability to speak to such a broad range of subjects, I think one of the big learnings that I had was that it really is important to be more than just a product guy. In Silicon Valley, a lot of people praise the product guy. I think if you look at Snapchat, the CEO of Snapchat, I'm going to go for, you're going to have to help me on the CEO of Snapchat. While you look it up, let me just give you this thought. He's really praised as a great product guy, and people love what the product looks like, particularly in Silicon Valley. But there's massive business questions around Snapchat. Does this have any viable business model? And to me, it goes back to what we talked about in the last show, those 3 Ps. I think innovation as a business really looks like people, product, and profit. And you can't cut corners on any of those. I think you need the full set, if you will. When you think about Jeff and what he shared with us, what are the big takeaways for you, Chad?
My biggest learning from Jeff and his amazing leadership at Amazon is the value of him choosing to be so customer centric, and how he's let that guide him in absolutely everything that he does, not only in the growth of Amazon's core business as the everything store, but in also spinning up every single other venture that he's done over the last 22 years. And what I'm taking away is I need to figure out what that one thing is, what that singular focus of mine is going to be, and then just be completely invested in it. because I think that will, over time, pay the benefits. I might not have some short-term gains, but I think I'm beginning to see, especially as we've followed 3 very interesting and different innovators, that's something that I'm going to have to choose, kind of what is my North Star.
Yeah. And I think when you see somebody who has their North Star, what instantly comes with that is their own relentless.com, doesn't it? They are relentless in seeing that come to life, that the dream becomes reality. And that's the other thing about him, not only the breadth of his capacity to understand different parts of his entire business, not only his single-minded obsession with customer service, but it's his relentless drive. It's his capacity to see different models. And when that clip you had on space and how he's going to build the infrastructure of the space economy. This makes Amazon look like just a warm-up act. So it's so exciting to see his thinking just coming out like that. And somebody I think that we can learn so much from. So I want to remind our listeners to go back to the Everything Store, the book by Brad Stone. How does that compare to other entrepreneurial books you've read? How would you put Brad's writing?
It's been my favorite so far. I read the Elon Musk book by Ashley Vance. I also read the Wild Ride book about Uber by Adam Lashinsky, and then the Everything Store. And I think that both the writing style and the structure of the book worked best for me. I think a lot of that too is just because Brad Stone's a known quantity in the industry and was trusted by Jeff and Amazon to write the book. It still remains independent, and he does a very nice job of getting into the mind of Jeff and talking to all of the employees, and it's not just a puff piece.
Yes, and the other thing I want to remind listeners is go to the interview. It will be in the show notes. It's on YouTube. Jeff Bezos with Walt Mossberg at the Recode Conference, May 31st, 2016. It's well worth a full listen. It's fantastic, full of goodies. As Chad rightly pointed out, there were 11 other clips that I selected that didn't make the cut, but it's full of insight and lots to learn there.
And most importantly, actually, we want your feedback. We want to know what you've enjoyed in the show. We want to know who you want us to profile in future shows. And I think we've gotten some interesting feedback so far from listeners, right, Mike?
Yeah, so we got feedback from 2 very different parts of the globe. From London, JP was really into learning about this 10X, but he had a really good point. He said, okay, so that's all well and good for the Elons and the Jeff Bezos as well, but how do we use the 10X when you're maybe starting out just by yourself or with a few co-founders? And I would always encourage folks to go to the basic formula of creating something 10X, which is to tackle a huge problem with a radical approach and to use and to seek the role of emerging technologies to play an unfair advantage in solving that problem. And just Google 10X and look up a lot of work there, but you can use that. And I think what we learned from Jeff was starting with big problems, the customer obsession. And Matt, from the other side of the globe, down here and down under, he said he really loved the piece around Travis in the last episode, not having his Sheryl Sandberg. And as we found out later that day, it cost him a big price. And it's great to see that folks are loving some of the innovation frameworks like 10X, but also some of the people and culture stuff that we're discovering from some of these founders. So what's next, Chad? We've got to think about who's going to be in the next show. Who are we going to cover?
We are going to take a look at Fred Smith, the very long time CEO and founder of Federal Express, otherwise known as FedEx. So we're going to be branching outside of, these titans of technology, and taking a look at, some maybe more traditional businesses, but have had, just as much or even a larger impact on our everyday lives.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. I really know very little about Jeff. And so I'm dying to get into FedEx and to find that story. I know it's been around for 30, 40 years. I remember using it when I first started my career. I mean, it was FedExing things to New York. It was like magic. So really keen to see the story of FedEx and how that happened. We should talk about show notes and all the goodies. Where will everyone find our fabulous show notes, Chad?
And we can find them on moonshots.io. We can also you can also find previous episodes and a feedback form. We would love to have your feedback on any part of the show, and especially who you'd like us to research and profile here on the podcast going forward. And I just want to say a quick thank you to all of you listeners from the first and second episodes. We hope to have you along for this ride for many more episodes to come.
Absolutely. So I'm going to call that a wrap. It's well past midnight here in Sydney, and it's probably almost lunchtime there in New York. So Chad, great talking again, and can't wait till the next episode.
Cheers, Mike.
Okay, see you later.